You're listening to Bad Dog Agility, bringing you training tips, interviews, and news about the great sport of dog agility.
I'm Esteban.
And I'm Sarah, and this is episode 204. Today's podcast is brought to you by Elite Science. Unlock your dog's full potential with a unique competitive edge solution, 1TDC. 1-tetradecanol complex is a patented blend of unique fatty acid oils designed to safely and effectively keep joints and muscles at their best to maximize performance and shorten recovery time. 1TDC is the next generation of fatty acids and is used by many current and past national agility champions and world team members. All of our listeners will automatically qualify for a great 1TDC special offer by purchasing online at BDA1TDC.com. That's BDA, the number 1, TDC.com.
Today's podcast is also brought to you by HittedBoard.com. HittedBoard.com has the innovative training tools you need for agility. Having problems with the dog walk or A-frame? The Hitted Board can fix that. Your dog doesn't like tugging? They'll love the Tug It. Can't move your A-frame around by yourself? The Move It can. Go to hittedboard.com and use discount code BDA10 to get 10% off your order. That's hittedboard.com. In this episode, we're going to talk all about proofing, and I've got some great stuff for both the beginners who are just getting started and you're starting to hear your instructor talk about things like proofing, and you should be doing this with your dog. So we're going to explain what it is and how you can do it and how you can do it very well. But for the veterans as well, I think I'm going to give you a couple of different ways to look at proofing where you can improve your training. I know that I've incorporated some of these changes into my own routines, and I'm seeing improved performances from my dog. So I think beginners and veterans, you're both going to get a lot out of this podcast. And let's start with, let's call it a classic definition of proofing, one that you're going to see a lot on the internet, or you're going to hear from instructors, or that you have probably used explaining to someone else what proofing is for your dog. And that is that proofing is the final step in training your dog to do any kind of behavior. So let's start with something as basic as a sit. You teach your dog to sit, and that last step, that final polish that we're going to put on it is we're going to ask our dog to sit in a bunch of different places, in front of Home Depot, at Starbucks, with kids around, different environments, different distractions. In the past, I know that we had an old podcast from almost 4 years ago, and a written article that we did. Was that for the general audience or just for the VIP?
VIP.
Okay, so we did an article for the VIP. And I know at that time I went ahead and made a distinction between proofing and generalization. That was a shorthand that I used. Basically, environmental stuff, you just show up in a new place and your dog can or can't do it. That would be a generalization issue. And a proofing issue is more like you front cross at the end of a weave poles, at the end of the weave poles, and your dog pops out. Right. So that's not an environmental thing per se, although you can definitely make the case that you are part of the environment. And so it was just a nice, easy, personal way for me to kind of break that down in a way that made sense in my training. Like, oh, my dog has a generalization issue. I need to go to more different places, right, or go to try different dog walks. Or, oh, we have a proofing issue. I had not proofed this particular situation, mostly related to myself.
Even in my own home field where my dog does everything great, but has never done it with kids around or banging noises.
Yeah. So that distinction is completely artificial and I'm sure downright offensive to psychologists. So for those of you out there, graduate students, PhDs in psychology, don't get bent out of shape about it. Speaking of psychology, let's talk about these concepts that we take from psychology, because a very common thing you hear is dogs don't generalize well. So there's that word generalize, and dogs discriminate very well. And so maybe a classic understanding of that is that a dog learns to do something in one place, but they're not going to do it someplace else. Right. So
which can work to our advantage. Like
absolutely.
This one couch my dog is allowed on, but not this other couch.
Right. So people say that dogs don't generalize very well, and they say they discriminate very well. They're like, oh, and there's an inverse relationship between the two, which just means that, as one behavior goes up, the other one must go down for any given circumstances.
Right.
Any little system that you set up there. And I want to just throw that out because it's not very helpful and everything is very behavior dependent. So your dog may generalize something very, very well, a specific behavior. They may not generalize another behavior very, very well. So it becomes much less useful to say that dogs in general don't generalize well. I want to know, what's the comparison? Do dogs not generalize well compared to horses, to 8-year-old children, to 17-year-olds, to 55-year-old adults who went to college? I'm sure that there are very different levels and it's very behavior dependent. So kind of let's throw all that out. Sure, that's a nice thing to say. Everybody's going to write that in their book or article or blog post about dog training. Dogs don't generalize well. It's just not very useful to me as a trainer to hear that or talk about that. So let's get into very, very specific behaviors, because I think of proofing as a subset of teaching, and you're enhancing your dog's understanding of some teaching concept by stripping away misconceptions and false associations, right? So the dog thinks, okay, I'm going to sit in this context, and as soon as mom puts a hat on, I'm not sitting quite as well, right? So when you train with and without that hat, you're kind of stripping away that association or the distraction or something that the dog feels they need or is bothering them in some performance of some behavior.
And I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that we can't talk to our dogs. Like, you can tell a kid that 2 + 2 is 4, no matter whether they're at school or at home or on the playground or anywhere else. You can just say, this is what it is. But you can't tell that to your dog. And so we do it through training, through proofing. We're saying, see what's common here? What's common here is that you sit when I say sit, even if you're facing a different part of the field, or even if there's birds flying around or squirrels running by or kids yelling in the park.
I agree. And I'm going to make it even a little more complicated, although I probably shouldn't. And it's the idea that emotions are sometimes involved, and conscious versus subconscious thoughts are involved here, where something, let's take an example of a person, because that's one
easy
I
to
think
relate
that,
to.
yeah, people understand. You can tell somebody, hey, the speech that you're about to give in front of 1 million people on live television is the same speech that you were doing in your bathroom.
Very
Okay?
good point.
So consciously, they're aware of that. They can tell themselves that, but they're going to have a very unconscious physiological response that they cannot control. They're going to have increased heart rate. Their pupils are going to dilate. These are things beyond their conscious control, right? They're going to breathe a little more quickly. They're going to have more adrenaline surging through their body. And that's in spite of being able to consciously understand the idea that the behavior is going to be the same, and that we want them to perform the same behavior, and that it's okay to perform the same behavior.
Fantastic point.
Okay. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. Okay. And they think of dogs as dogs and people as people. All right. But there's a lot of blurring, in my opinion, between those two species in terms of cognition, which is what we're really talking about. The ability to work through, understand, and think about what we're doing in different contexts in order to achieve certain goals, such as getting that treat, giving a great speech that will get you elected to some political office, different goals. Okay. Another example, I think, is starting an IV. So intravenous fluids, those are things that sometimes you'll get when you roll into an emergency room and you're dehydrated. Not even when you're dehydrated, when you need to get medicine into a vein. And what I'm telling you is that there are nurses who almost exclusively put in IVs in non-emergent situations. And they're very, very good at it. They take their time. It takes a minute or two.
Find the perfect
They find
vein
the perfect
or whatever.
vein. They get it in there, and they get it in there just about every time. If you take that same nurse and suddenly put them in an emergency situation, in an emergency room where there's, say, a bus crash, and now capacity is overwhelmed. You have patients everywhere. Screaming, loud noises, people shouting orders at you, and the patient in front of you needs this line in as quickly as possible so that the team of healthcare professionals around you can do the next step, whatever that next step is. You just need to get this done and get out of their way so they can, run off to surgery or whatever. An incredible amount of pressure, and you may find that their proficiency is decreased. They just can't get that IV in as quickly as they could under ideal circumstances, right? And this is very similar to what our dogs are dealing with. And so that's where I kind of really focus on that proofing, because that's something that we can really affect and kind of see coming. We know that that situation is going to arise with respect to that skill. With the environment, it's a little more unpredictable. Okay, and I have two great examples. They are from my own personal dogs, both golden retrievers. My very first dog, beautiful golden retriever named Gypsy, got her all ready. She had a great debut. Clean runs everywhere in Novice, except for one thing. She would not take the panel jump. And she had seen a panel jump before. But there was something special about this panel jump. It was at a place in Hutto, Texas. And at this particular place, they had this weird checkerboard pattern. Now, have you ever seen those paintings? Not a painting. It's like artwork where you stare at it. It's some geometric shape. And then if you stare at it long enough, it turns into a building or a dolphin. There's some hidden picture within it. Okay. That's what this thing looks like.
Channeling the 80s here. Yeah.
If you stared at this thing long enough, I'm sure it was going to turn into a llama or something, right? There's going to be some kind of Empire State Building skyline or something.
Right.
New York skyline. And she just thought it was really weird and she wouldn't take it. She would go around it. And it happened on both of her runs in that debut weekend. So we didn't finish her. We didn't get any legs for whatever run that happened in. I don't know if it was standard or jumpers. And it was a couple of times before she got over it. Now, after she'd gone to the show, that venue a couple of times, it didn't bother her anymore. But that's a great example. She had the skill. We had checked it against different panel jumps. And she went out there and it was weird. Same thing happens to me 10 years later with Gitchy. More than 10 years later. Yeah. And got Gitchy all trained to a very, very high level and went to world team tryouts, right? FCI Agility World Championship tryouts for Team USA. And they had this monstrous viaduct. Viaduct is just like a big old panel jump.
And it was
solid,
like
you can't see through it.
Homemade one. So it's not
one
like
that you could purchase
It's not like the purchased one.
Somebody.
Right.
And it was huge. And Gitchy was like, nope.
Cool.
Not going to take it. Fortunately, they had set it up as the practice jump so that people could kind of get used to it. And I think this is before we had like formal practices. I'm not sure there was a practice day.
I think there was a practice day, but they also set it up as a practice jump.
So they went up there and then so many dogs had problems with it. And when I say so many, I mean like 3 or 4.
Right, but these are like elite dogs.
But one of them was mine.
Yeah, right.
And they said, okay, well, we're going to make it the practice jump so you can come early the next day and use it as a practice jump and get your dog used to it. And so we did. And for her, I'm out there trying to get her to do it. I'm freaking out. And that's my example. You have a dog highly trained to do all kinds of skills on a viaduct. And then she shows up and is like, I'm not going over this viaduct. I don't even know what this is. But sir, this is not a viaduct. Okay, I'm not doing this. Okay. So environmental issue there, generalization problem. And then you got to kind of take the dog over and be like, see, it's not going to explode in the middle of your jump or anything like that. So those are my 2 examples. I'm going to give beginners out there a very common one. And this is a golden nugget for you people out there. It's worth listening to this podcast episode just to hear this. And it's that many people do not put a tunnel under their contacts in the training or teaching. So the very first time, and you may get all the way to excellent or masters before you see this, just random luck of the draw of your course design. If the first time your dog sees a tunnel under a contact is at a trial, they are very likely to alter their striding.
Or
slow down,
refuse
stop,
altogether.
refuse, or hop off the contact.
Yes.
Okay. And this is going to happen a lot. And you may be very confused. Be like, whoa, my dog has never missed a contact before. I don't know what happened. I'm telling you, check. Was it a tunnel? So you want the first time a dog sees something as much as possible. And I gave 2 examples where we couldn't help that, right? With my 2 Goldens. But you can help this. Put a tunnel under your contacts. That's the A-frame and the dog walk. Before you do any kind of, contact and then out to the tunnel, don't even worry about that. We just want them to getting the normal behavior and then going on and taking a jump.
It's not about the discrimination. I think so many people think that a tunnel under a contact is about discriminating between the tunnel and the contact. But you can have a tunnel go underneath a contact or do a U underneath a contact. And you never go from tunnel to contact or contact to tunnel. It's just there. And it will affect your dog if they have never seen it.
Yes. All right. Now, related to that, I want to go over a couple common mistakes related to proofing. So number 1, and I think this is a very big problem that almost everyone has. People think of proofing as the final stage. It is simply not true. And it's closely related to the false belief that your dog has finished behaviors. Oh, once they take this jump, once I teach a dog how to jump, they can jump. And when they drop a bar, when they refuse, when they do all these things, this is a mistake that they are making because they already, quote unquote, know this behavior, the jump or the weaves or whatever. So it's really not the final stage. We're going to talk a little bit more about that when we talk about how to proof, right? And the second, I think, really big mistake here is people change their criteria instead of proofing. And you may say, what? No, I don't do that. That's poor dog training. Let me give you a classic example. You and instructors enable this, actually encourage this. So let's say you're a beginner handler and you go to a trial and you run into a situation, your dog's a little more excitable and they break the start line or something like that. And instead of saying, okay, well, we're going to work on that and proof it to a higher level and address the situation, your instructor might say, don't worry about it. He was just very excitable. First trial, it's okay, right? You're changing your criteria. You're accepting a different behavior in the context of the same cues and you're rewarding it. So your dog's going to be more likely to offer that behavior if it's an easier behavior for them to do versus whatever you had previously taught, right? And almost universally, it's easier to go ahead and go on and take the first obstacle than wait for your handler to give you some kind of verbal release cue. You can get to what you want to a little bit more quickly. To me, this is the opposite of proofing. It's anti-proofing, right? You're creating a very serious problem here.
Instead of teaching your dog that sit means sit no matter where you are, no matter what's going on, no matter what is happening around you, you are actively teaching your dog sit means sit in practice. Sit doesn't mean sit in the ring.
Right. And a lot of, I like to call this first run of the day exceptions. Mm-hmm. I just made that up. I don't really like to call it anything. People shouldn't do it. What they will say is the first run of a trial, the first run of a weekend, the first run after a 3-month layoff due to winter snow or lack of trialing because you were busy with life, my dog's going to be a little more amped up. So I'm going to lower my criteria and reward things that I wouldn't ordinarily reward. Even if I hadn't done it in practice. You would never do this in practice. You should not be doing it in a trial. Some people will even lower these criteria in practice.
There's a difference. Okay, I think this is super important. There is a difference between lowering difficulty and lowering criteria.
Exactly.
Lowering difficulty would be, my dog is a little amped up. I'm not going to lead out 5 jumps. I'm going to lead out 1 jump.
Perfect.
Lowering criteria is, I'm going to lead out 5 jumps, but if he breaks when I'm at jump 3, I'm going to go on.
Because it's our first run.
Because it's the first run of the day. Those are two very, very, very different things. It is absolutely okay to look at the situation, look at the stress level of your dog, and to say, I need to lower the difficulty. That's good training because what you're doing is saying, I want to make sure that my dog is still successful. I want to make sure that my dog is still meeting that criteria. Therefore, I am only going to go as far as I feel they are capable of at this moment.
Mm-hmm. I really like that. Okay. So we've talked about those 2 common mistakes, and now you're not going to do that, right? So related to that first mistake, we talked about how thinking that proofing is a final stage thing.
It's the icing on the cake.
The icing on the cake.
No, it's the cake.
Right. Okay. Sure. It's the cake. And so let's talk about how to proof, because it's going to directly address this mistake that I think people are making and how they think about proofing. How do we proof in general now? How do most dog trainers proof? Okay. We teach a complex behavior. We start nice and simple. We use lots of reinforcement. Let's pick, for example, the weave poles.
That's a good one.
And now it's finished. Ta-da! My dog can weave.
Under perfect circumstances.
Right. And then once we have it, now we start to build distractions into the process. Okay. So now we say, okay, now we're going to do all those cool proofing exercises I saw you do on those bad dog agility videos. We're going to have someone else, waving a toy. Okay. I had, my son standing a few feet away playing his French horn. That was a tough one. Opening an umbrella. My border collie really struggled with that. If the umbrella was already open and you were standing 6 feet away, it was okay. But if you actively opened it in the middle of her weaving, she would pop out 100% of the time. Right? So those are all classic examples of proofing. You have a dog, they already do a complex behavior, and now you start small with little distractions, and you make them bigger and bigger. Or if you're going to proof against handler motion, right, you start with the handler being very close and running in a straight line, then the handler maybe being 6 feet away, then 10 feet away, then 20 feet away, or the handler doing the front cross at the end, or clapping, or making chicken wings, or whatever. We all know about this kind of proofing. And honestly, I find it a very fun, amusing part of training to do proofing exercises and to really see the light turn on in a dog's head and be like, aha. And that's the moment when they, I think, start to generalize a behavior very, very well. Like, oh, okay, no matter what the handler is doing, I need to do these 12 pulls and I'm going to get rewarded for doing that.
And then their speed increases, their confidence increases, their drive increases.
We have increased their understanding that there is the value of proofing. Okay, so back to my point. I just described something that sounds good, then why am I saying it's maybe not ideal, or maybe there's a newer, better way? The newer, better way is this. And I know we mentioned in the last podcast how we went to SeaWorld and we got to talk with the trainers and see the behind the scenes training. One of the things they do is super interesting. They have animals that they are bringing along in the same way that you and I would bring along a new dog or puppy. They've not yet started showing. And what they do is they incorporate them into the shows. Well, what do they do?
Very specific way.
Yeah, they don't know how to do anything. All they do is they bring them out on stage. They use positive reinforcement, but they literally just bring them out. They wave to the audience.
Do like one trick.
One simple trick. Some of them don't even do tricks. They just come out. They say, hey, this is so-and-so. And they're going to be part of the team in the next year or so.
Yeah.
Say goodbye. And then they have other dolphins do stuff. And then this animal just walks off. Like literally they walked onto a stage, took a look around and left. But this is very, very important. And they do it because this is when they have access to those crowds.
It was so brilliant. And the other thing that I thought was so interesting was if you've ever been to one of these shows, you've seen this happen. And as soon as they said that they did that, I instantly was like, oh, I've definitely seen them bring out, some random animal and all they do is say hi. They give you a little background about
they tell you about the animal.
Right. The animal itself, like, oh, he's 2 tons, or whatever. And they do a lot of talking and teaching. The animal is doing very little. And then they go back. And so as soon as they said that, I thought I've seen that. To me, it was just part of the show. I didn't even notice as a participant in the show, as the audience member, I didn't even notice. And yet, I'm pretty involved in training animals. So if I'm not going to notice, most of the public isn't going to notice. And here you have put the animal in that situation with all of the crowds and all of the noise and all of the laughter and all of that. Yeah.
So what are they doing? They're not taking a complex finish behavior. In fact, this animal has no complex finish behaviors. Right. So they're not taking something, let's say like a smiley face, right? A sea lion makes a smiley face. They're not taking that skill and then putting it in front of an empty stadium and then 10 people and then 50 people and then 100 people. Although they do try and create circumstances like that. That's kind of the classic way we do things. What they're doing is they're taking someone with like no behavior or a very, very simple behavior and then increasing the distractions first. So instead of being complex behavior and starting with small distractions, they're starting with a very simple behavior and then starting with small distractions and working their way
Absolutely.
Up to get them that exposure.
And have we talked about this exact scenario? Yes, we have. We talked about preparing for your novice debut, taking your dog with you to the trial, having them in that environment before their first show.
So absolutely. So if you think of a novice run or any agility run as a series of complex behaviors all chained together, 22 obstacles, but many more, I would argue over 100 behaviors, turning and responding to front crosses and even the weave pulls is not one behavior, right? They have to slow down. They got to find the entry. They got to do this pull, that pull, that pull, that pull, exit. I mean, it's crazy all the things that the dogs have to do. There's so many behaviors. They're all strung together. They have to be done in a very precise way to get a clean run. When you say it that way, clean runs are really impressive, yes. Right? Agility is a very complex and difficult sport. And the stuff you're doing and the stuff you are training, you got to give yourself a pat on the back, as complex as anything that they're doing over at SeaWorld. Mm-hmm. Okay. So the vast majority of people are going to show up and then they, their dog is in their crate and they're going to run and they're going to do all this stuff. One of the things you can do, yes, Sarah, I can take my dog to the show site in advance. Maybe I don't have access to that. So one of the things you can do is before their first run, I'm going to take them out and then I'm going to do simple behaviors, but I'm going to increase the levels of distraction. So maybe in my car, when they're still in the crate in the car, I can ask them to sit when they're still in the crate. They're going to sit, give them a treat, and I let them jump down. Now we're in the parking lot, a little more distracting. New spot, sit again. And then now in the crating area, right? Outside of the crate, and then inside of the crate in the crating area. And then maybe outside of the building where they're going to run. And then now I open the door, I step through, and I'm inside of the building, but still maximally far away from where the runs are happening. And I ask the dog to sit there. And in each of those places, the sit is being generalized. You're helping with that proofing in an environment that you didn't have access to at home. You know, you can do all the proofing you want at home, but it's not this situation here. Okay, but it's worth doing because now you have a dog that's going to take a simple behavior and we're going to generalize it from very easy and we're going to work all the way up to get to the side of the ring where they're going to go in, where their name is on the board and you need to check in, right where they're going to enter. Okay, because that's where they're going to be hanging out and have a lot of stress and you're going to need them to do certain behaviors. I would take it all the way there and I would do it during the walkthrough. The walkthrough, there's no other dogs out, so you're not interfering with anyone's runs. You know, in case you have a barky dog, you don't have to worry about other dogs being in that area right around the gate. And all those people out there, you know what it's like? It's like the SeaWorld crowd. Mm-hmm. And now we're just coming out there and you're asking your dog to just stand there and wave to the crowd. Except instead of waving to the crowd or smiling, they are doing their sit or they are doing their hand touch or they are doing their spin and you're giving them lots of reward and reinforcement. You're going to get some very positive associations with this location and all around this trial site, every location. People are not doing this. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to take my border collie out to trial again. And it's been, I think, a couple of years since she's trialed. And she can get a little nervous in some spots, right? This is something that I need to remember to do. I don't have Gitchy here, Gitchy who went through all of that training and proofing and situational rewards and things like that. I need to do that with this dog as well. I can't be negligent. I can't say, well, this dog is already doing very high level handling stuff and destroying these international courses. And I anticipate no problems on this novice course. That's not the right way to think about it. Right? I've got to be really sensitive to the environment. And can she do these behaviors in the same way that she does at home or in the practice field? Can she do it in this new environment? How do I do it? I'm going to start with super simple behaviors. I'm not going to ask her to throttle and do all that. That's going to happen in about an hour. Okay. But for now, I'm going to have her play with me. I'm going to have her tug with me. I'm going to have her do some start line work and I'm going to make it easy and then move it up to a little bit more difficult. I'm also going to back off. So people also forget to do that in proofing. When you proof up to a really hard level, you can't just infinitely keep making it harder, and now you debut. Throw in the easy stuff. Okay. It's reinforcing for the dog. It's really a nice thing to do. And so now we've given you that alternate way of approaching, and we've emphasized the importance of all this simple behavior stuff. Simple behaviors. This was a really big deal at SeaWorld, and it's a big deal for top agility trainers. Another great trainer example of a person who does this very, very well, Sylvia Turkman, right? And I think a lot of people recognize and think of Sylvia as kind of at the top of the positive trainer pyramid there as someone to look up to. This is something that she incorporates into her own training and getting dogs ready to trial and even when they are trialing. So I think this is something that we can all be aware of and learn. There was one more example. I just wanted to throw it out there. And it's basketball. And this happened to me as a kid. So I spent many hours, many weeks, many months, years playing basketball, but not on a formal team, right? Just out at the same court in my neighborhood over and over and over again. You get very good. You get very good at shooting. The first time I went to a game, right, or practice, and it was at, I think it was at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Beautiful indoor court. I never even played indoors. Beautiful court, multiple rims. It was just so big and vast. And when I started shooting, I was terrible. My shooting percentage was way down. I'm like a shooter and I couldn't shoot. And I was like, wait, what's going on? Right. And a lot of people might think, oh, well, now you got all these people watching. I was like, no, I played in front of people before. I've been in stressful situations. I've been in intense games where you almost get into a fight with your opponent. I've tried to impress girls who are watching on the side. Like I've been in these situations, but something's wrong with my shot. And so it turned out that as a shooter, I was focusing on the backboard. So a lot of my lining up a shot, I would incorporate the backboard into my vision. And so the backboards are solid. Like you can't see through them and they're not rectangular outdoors. And so when you go to a real court, it's see-through, like plexiglass, big and rectangular. And there's empty space behind the backboard. And so visually, it's not the same picture. And I really, really struggled. So I had to change where I was looking. You had to start looking at the rim. So the actual metal rim is the same wherever you go, right? So you have to use the same things. And I didn't realize that at first. And it had nothing to do with pressure or my desire to be good or any conscious thought. It was just the way that I had learned to shoot. And I had to completely relearn how I shot. And it took a long time. Okay. It took a really long time. And so, how long you're asking? Yeah, years. Years to relearn my shot. Does that sound like anything in dog agility?
Jumping. So there are dogs that learn, especially this new generation where they have backsides and throttles and things, and we do everything on a wing jump. Now suddenly you have a wingless jump in a trial situation. And maybe they don't do it quite as well. Or the wing jump where they're really using the wings to measure where they are taking off, right? And now it's different when you have a double or a triple where the wings have different meaning and different spatial relationships to where the bar is going to be, right? Or you get on a different set of jumps. So I think all of those, I think that's just a very, very good example of something that we don't think about. It's related to this whole idea of generalization and proofing and getting your dog on different types of equipment. And so that's something to keep in mind for jumping as we become more and more aware of how dogs utilize other things than we think they do. Right.
Everybody thinks, oh, they're looking at the bar. And they're not looking at the bar. Just like, oh, look at that shooter. He shoots so well. He's looking at the basket. No. He was looking at the backboard.
And didn't even know it.
And didn't even realize it. Right. And needed to be, quote unquote, reprogrammed, retaught, reproofed. And so I think there's a powerful lesson there. All right. Well, that's it for this week's podcast. If you have any questions about it, please be sure to send us an email at, what are we using now? Sarah? Team at baddogagility.com.
That's right.
Yeah. Or if you're seeing this on Facebook, you can leave a comment in the comments section. And before we go, you have until October 3rd to join our newest online course. That's going to be the Agility World Championship Experience. In just about a week, Sarah's going to be headed over to Sweden. She's going to be joined by Jennifer Crank. Jennifer Crank is running a medium dog. She's a former individual silver and bronze medalist at the World Championship. She's the reigning 16-inch American Kennel Club champion. And she's going to be joined by Jessica Patterson of Canada, who will be representing the large dogs. Jessica is a former European Open winner. And they will also be joined by Tobias Wust of Germany. He is, of course, the defending two-time small dog world champion. And that's with two different dogs. He's also won the European Open twice. And together, the three of them are going to give you an inside look into their thoughts and approach to all the courses that they run over the weekend. It's a very unique experience. You definitely want to sign up. You don't want to miss this.
If you're not able to follow the event in real time, that's okay. You'll have lifetime access to all of the videos. You can register online at baddogagility.com/AWC. And that's it for this week's podcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Elite Science and HitItBoard.com. Happy training.
Man, just imagine if Americans switched from pounds to kilograms overnight. There would be mass confusion.